Welcome back to the Dive Line with Jim and Craig. Hi, Craig.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. So if you didn't see our last episode, it was a fantastic episode with Sea Shepherd. We had founder Paul Watson and a truly inspiring chat with Peter Hammerstead. Absolutely incredible interview that was. So if you didn't see that, just look back and get onto YouTube, have a look. This episode, Craig, we've got a really interesting chat with Dan this episode, haven't we? So we've got Dan Europe. We've got Laura Marroni. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Hello from Italy.
And hello from the UK. Okay, and we've got Guy Thomas as well. So, hello, Guy.
Hello, guys.
Hi, Guy. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you both for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you. So, Craig.
Most divers have heard of Dan, but for those that don't know, what does Dan actually do as an organisation and what service does it offer?
So, DAN, that stands for Divers Alert Network. It's a medical organization that for over 40 years have been close to the divers to assist them in case of need and provide essential medical services and assistance services. Our mission is to make diving safer and possibly accident and injury free, which is a very important mission and an ambitious one, I would say. And we do this through our researches on important physiological subjects related to diving, and our studies are published in some of the main hyperbaric medicine journals, but we also do our best to spread all this knowledge through our channels, so through our Alert Diver magazine or our website, and through all the safety campaigns that we carry on for our members and for the whole diving community.
Excellent. That was very well put, and I think you might have rehearsed that once or twice before. I'm sure you've been asked that question many times, Laura.
Well, yes.
The insurance side is also a very big part of what Dan is known for, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. That's one of the services, probably the one for which we are most renowned, even though, as I told you just a moment ago, we are mainly a medical foundation. But, every diver knows that diving accidents can have very big costs. For example, when it comes to hyperbaric treatment, especially in remote places, starting from Egypt to the Maldives, Thailand, and so on. So having a reliable insurance that is knowledgeable about diving and diving illnesses is very important. And that's why the insurance services is one of the very first services that we introduced since the beginning, together with the medical, the 24/7 medical hotline.
Yeah, I think that's why both Jim and I choose Dan for our medical insurance, and you just hit the nail on the head there in you've got the expertise and understand the medical side of diving accidents. We feel better than anybody, and as I say, it's why Jim and I are both members. Going on to some of the questions that we've got for you, what does Dan see the effects of this COVID-19 as having on the dive community, both for the individual diver and the dive industry itself?
Well, it's not surprising that the diving sector has been hit badly by this situation. Being also very much linked to the tourism sector. So in the diving community, we know that most organizations and companies have suffered badly from the situation with big economical downturns. which is now hopefully finally coming to an end or to a solution. But what I would like to say, apart from concentrating on the negative side, is that I was personally very positively surprised to see how the diving community was able to react to the situation, because I'm sure you also noticed the very good use that was done of online tools. For example, we saw a lot of instructors, but even all the training agencies making good use of webinars or even investing on online learning, which, in my opinion, helped a lot to keep the community alive.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim is an instructor, and Jim, you did some courses using Zoom as a medium to carry those out, didn't you? And as you say, Laura, the whole community still managed to come together, whether it be sharing photographs or whether it be doing online courses, or I'm also very positive about that effect that we made the best of a bad situation, really.
Yes, definitely. And I think especially now that we are hopefully able to go back to the water, having the possibility to stay on track during these months by following, as you said, webinars or Zoom meetings and so on, is very important, because one of the things that actually is scaring us the most is that people go back to the water after few months of inactivity, and you cannot give it for granted that they remember everything well. So people should not rush to the water. Keep it slowly.
Yeah, I mean, I think all the dive centres are adapting really well, aren't they? And we can do lots of theory sessions and online courses, all of that. But when we go back shortly and we start using equipment and things like that, what's Dan's recommendations on sort of disinfecting equipment, or for customers to, at the end of the dive or at the end of training, what's your recommendations on that?
Okay, I think we're going to have to divide between the personal equipment and the equipment that is given from the dive center, or eventually from the dive club. So when we talk about dive club and dive center equipment that is given to clients, obviously this should be disinfected in an appropriate way to make sure that there is no contamination of the regulator or any other materials that is given to the client. So what you really need to do is you need to look at how your dive operation works, where the risks are, and then you need to find a solution for the problem. A solution could be, for example, that these materials are given to the client not inside the dive center or the club, but outside, to avoid contact with the client in the dive center, and that the client will keep this material for the rest of the day or the rest of the dive, and he will give it to the dive center staff at the end of the dive. All the dive center staff will collect the materials and they will disinfect it at the end of the day or the end of the dive operation. When it comes to personal equipment, then it complicates a bit, because what we would like to avoid is that actually the client starts using the rinsing tubs from the dive center to disinfect his own materials. Not because we don't want that he disinfects his own materials, but because if everybody starts touching the rinsing bags, and if everybody starts just adding materials to the rinsing tub, at the end of the day, the disinfectant solution will probably not be really effective anymore. And on top of that, everybody will add things to a solution. Let me explain it a bit better. If I put a dive suit in a solution, and the solution and the contact time between the dive suit and the solution needs to be 15 minutes, and after 2 minutes, another diver arrives, and he puts another suit on top of mine. And after 5 minutes, another diver arrives who puts another suit on top of the material already in the back, then it's very difficult to get to these 15 minutes. So our recommendation would be for personal equipment, take your equipment home, disinfect it at home. If you want to rinse it in the dive center, it is possible, but the dive center should have the facility to have rinsing water available. The dive center obviously could also choose to give rinsing tubs to each and every single client, but that's going to be practically very difficult if you have 30 or 40 clients in your dive center.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Guy. I hadn't even considered about the people adding their own equipment and then some period of time later somebody else adding something else, and it's just amazing the things that we hadn't thought of that you guys as the experts have obviously taken a lot of time to consider. What about dive boats? What steps should they take, whether it be a larger boat or even a very small rib, 6-7 meter rib? What steps can dive boats make when it comes to social distancing?
Well, social distancing on a dive boat is very limited, obviously, because you need to get your 2 meters distance between two persons on a dive boat. So if your dive boat is quite big, shouldn't be that much of an issue. But if your dive boat is relatively small, this means that the amount of clients you can take on your dive boat will be reduced. But it isn't only about the social distancing on the dive boat. You know that if you have a diver with a possible virus and he's on a dive boat, the droplets or even the aerosol could travel longer due to the wind or due to the moving boat. So if you go on a dive boat, I think it's a good consideration that all divers would wear an appropriate protection mask, first of all, no matter from the distance between two persons, because the droplets or the aerosol in the wind could go from one side of the boat to the other side of the boat. This is about the social distancing, but it's not only about social distancing on a dive boat. Also, you have to get materials on the dive boat. So what you would like to avoid is everybody wants to get on board at the same moment. Probably the best thing is have dive sets set up at the shore, then the staff puts them on board, and if all materials are on board, then the clients will come on board in a way that they keep on the social distancing. And the same would count actually when you go into the water. You also want social distancing on the surface. Now, underwater, there is not much of a problem, but on the surface, there is. So what we would like to see is that there's also the needed distance between divers at the surface. They don't have their masks at the surface, the protection masks. They could have their diving mask, which protects the nose and the eyes, and they could have their regulator in their mouth, which protects them a bit as well. But keeping a distance is always a good idea, even when they come back on board.
That's absolutely true. I think under the water, the risks are lower, aren't they? So on the surface, it's greatly increased, especially something like the buddy check. So myself and Craig did a short video about doing a buddy check before our first post-lockdown dive, and it's gained some attention. How would you suggest we do a safe buddy check using the octopus when we're checking our air?
Well, it's a good question, and it will be different from situation to situation. Let me give you an example. If I'm diving with one single buddy, then to avoid the risk of contamination, and I could agree with my buddy that I'm the one who is going to breathe from my regulator, and he's the one who's going to check my octopus, so that in case of need, I give my octopus to this person, and the other way around. If I'm a diving instructor and I have two students, it will not work because I do not know which of the two students I'm going to have to give my regulator to. So if you want to be completely safe, then you would actually need to do the body breathing yourself, while your buddy or your client or your student is visually and verbally checking if you do everything okay. And then afterwards, you would need to disinfect your octopus again before you go into the water. Practically, this is not an easy thing to do, but then you would be absolutely safe. On the other hand, if you're diving with one single diver, then you could give him your octopus, he could breathe from it, but at the end of the dive, you must make sure that you disinfect the second stage that was used by the other diver. And in all of this, it's important, linked to the question before from the boat, is that when the regulator is not used, it's best to have it in a plastic bag. Obviously, it's clear. If you want to avoid contamination, it's better not to breathe from the octopus, but you also want to make sure the octopus actually works.
Yeah, I'm going to be putting my regs in plastic bags now. Another thing I hadn't thought of, but one thing I did think of, Jim just mentioned that a couple of days ago together we went and had a dive, and I was underwater and really enjoying being back, and then just this light bulb moment went off where I thought, what about my air? Is my air okay? I didn't fill this tank. What are your recommendations, Guy, for dive centres actually filling tanks? Are there recommendations there?
Yes, well, it all comes again to risk assessment. You would need to look, okay, how do I fill my cylinders? Well, what is the risk? The risk is that the virus will get into the cylinder. So how does the virus get into the cylinder? Because it gets into the cylinder through the air inlet of the compressor, or where the compressor takes its air. So if you avoid that, the point of entry in the compressor is in a safe place, then the virus would not be able to enter in the cylinder. So let's say that you put the hose or the inlet filter at a good height, where as you would do with to avoid carbon monoxide poisoning, you put it on a good place, a safe place, where there is no contamination possibility between a person who is coughing and or aerosol that going into the air and the inlet of the compressor. So that's the first thing. That's what you would like. That's what you want to do. Make sure that the inlet is in a safe position. But it's not only about the inlet, it's also about the cylinder valve and the hose of the compressor itself. If you have a hose of a compressor and you put your finger in there, or you are coughing into that hose, then the contamination will be directly on the hose. The same counts for the cylinder. So what you would like to do is, whoever handles cylinders must make sure that both the cylinder valve and the hose from the filling whip or the filling hose is free from any virus. So the compressor operations only present staff members. He brings the cylinder outside, so this reduce the possibility of contamination.
Well, I'm very pleased to say that our local dive centre's air intake for their compressor is actually out through the roof of the building, so certainly away from any contaminants that way. And I know that they're sterilising hands before they touch tanks and bottles. So, but all very good advice.
Okay. Well, let's stop for a moment, because sterilizing hands, the best thing is to wash your hands. Because imagine that you are filling nitrox or oxygen, then you don't want any contact between the alcohol from this disinfectant gel and your hose or the inlet of your cylinder. You want to avoid oxygen and alcohol. That's everybody knows that, but we should consider it. So the best thing is to wash hands when you're doing compressor operation and not use actually alcohol-based products.
Yeah, that's very good.
That's a very good point. Yeah, very good point. Our local dive centre doesn't fill anything other than air, no nitrox and no oxygen fills. And so that hadn't thought about, of course, yeah, I mean, contaminants in those environments are something that you're going to have to be very careful of. And I'm sure every dive centre that fills oxygen and nitrogen have put that in their risk assessment and will be washing hands, not using alcohol-based hand cleaners for sure. What about first aid and safety? And there is obviously an inherent risk in what we do as divers. What about a rescue situation? What's the guidelines there?
Well, the risk is always the same, of course. The risk is the droplet and the airborne droplets. I don't know how to call them. If you would do mouth-to-mouth contact, obviously there is a contact. It would be as like kissing someone. So it would be a possible contamination. The guideline today says that we should not, as a lay rescuer, we should not practice mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Then there is the chest compression itself. There is not enough research done to exactly know what the effect would be of a person pushing on a heart and an eventual aerosol coming out of the mouth. It's not sure how that works, but to avoid any possible problems, the recommendations from the European Resuscitation Council and ILCOR are to put a a face mask on the face of the injured or the non-breathing person, or if you don't have a face mask, a cloth or a towel on the face, of course not a towel too big, but I mean just a protection to make sure that when they squeeze the heart that there is no air coming out of the mouth, which would pose a risk to the rescuer. On top of that, the rescuer, in order to check if the person is breathing, should not put his ear in his mouth and his face too close to the mouth of the injured person. He should not tap the shoulders, but it's best that he would take the feet or the ankle and just push on there, watch the chest, and eventually he could also put his hand on the chest to feel if there is any movement of the chest. Best thing is to use DPI, so to wear gloves and a protective mask when performing CPR.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and clearly you must have a lot of information on Dan's website. Where can our viewers get more information from? Guy, have you got this listed in a guide?
Yes, we do have a guide. Actually, we prepared a document that is named the 10 safety recommendations for diving and COVID-19, and they can be found in the news section of the Dan Europe website. As you probably know, we represent Dan Europe, and we have colleagues at Dan America that represent the other part of the world. So you can also find all these guidelines on their website for listeners that are maybe not from the EU. And it's diversalertnetwork.org. And even there you can find a COVID dedicated section.
Excellent. I think Jim's just put that web URL along the bottom of the screen there for everyone to see. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
I just wanted to go back to the buddy check. Something that I'd remembered that somebody mentioned to me about the buddy check, and had an idea that maybe every diver should have their own pony bottle or spare air. What would you think of that? Is that something that could happen?
Yeah, well, as I said before, there's more than one solution to a possible risk, or to a risk mitigation. You mitigate the risk, and then you look what the solutions are. If everybody would have a pony bottle, it would be a solution. It would be practically impossible because everybody would have to go to the shop and buy a pony bottle or a spare air. I don't see that happening. And at the end of the day, you still will need to check the regulator to see if the regulator works. So it's always the same. The regulator might get contaminated, but let's not forget, if you are diving and you are at 20 meters of depth, and my body falls out of air, I think it's a good idea to give him the regulator, because if you don't give it, then he's not going to make it back to the surface probably. And another thing which is very important is that you need to plan your dive to avoid falling without air in the first place, especially now. Well, not especially now, you always have to do it, but now we have an additional reason to respect that rule.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Dive conservatively, and if ever there was a reason now to dive conservatively, not pushing your boundaries, keeping within your own limits, remaining fit to dive. COVID-19 must focus everybody in making sure that they do that now.
And if I could add something very, very briefly, I think it's also important to keep in mind protection of the environment, because we've mentioned using plastic bags and protective equipment like face masks, gloves, and so on. So I think as I said, it's important to be aware of having the correct methods of disposing of all these materials, so that we don't find them back in the sea after using them. And the same applies to the chemical disinfectants that we could use to disinfect the equipment. So it's important to dispose of them in a proper way in order to avoid the contamination of the sea or of the ocean.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because so many dive centres just empty the bucket of water, which now isn't a bucket of water for rinsing. It's now a bucket of chemicals. And so they're clearly going to have to take different actions in how they dispose and replenish their rinse tanks, aren't they?
Yes, exactly. I mean, if the liquid that was used to disinfect the equipment contains actually chemicals, it should not be disposed of directly in the sea. And that's something, I mean, we understand it's not going to be easy, and logistics can vary according to the location where the dive center is. I mean, of course, this is, we all know that, but it's also important to keep in mind that some of the disinfectants, like bleach, for example, or even alcohol, can damage the environment.
Yeah, certainly, and I should imagine this is going to be a big consideration if it's a liveaboard, and they're sterilising equipment on a liveaboard. I mean, I suppose there's not much need to, unless you do end up sharing air in an emergency situation for real life. Then that would need decontaminating, but you don't want liveaboards flushing, bleached water into oceans, and the obvious effects that's going to have.
Yeah, there are studies ongoing on alternatives to bleach, for example, that you've mentioned. So stay tuned, because I'm sure that more news will follow on this subject, especially in the diving community, because we're also concerned about protecting the environment.
Yeah, absolutely, and keeping in touch with Dan Europe will be the best way to find out as and when testing's done on new materials that can be used. Brilliant, guys! Thank you so much for coming on. Jim, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Well, before you do go, I mean, we really appreciate, obviously, all the answers to the questions that you've given, and really interesting and concise. But I just wanted, you two guys are divers yourselves. So I just wanted to ask you both individually sort of how you started diving, and tell us a little bit about your diving history.
Oh, well, I think I've started to swim before I could walk, actually. I grew up in a small town on the Adriatic Sea. So the sea was always part of my life. And my father taught me to dive when I was 4, can we say it? Let's say my first certification. I got it when I was 12, but I've always been a very passionate diver. Then I also became a technical diver. I also sometimes use rebreathers. Very recently, I discovered my new passion, that is cave diving. So, I mean, the important for me is to be underwater, then be it wrecks or caves, or a very, very simple recreational shallow dive. That's always very thrilling.
Blowing bubbles.
Yes.
Yeah. How about you, Guy? How did it start?
I didn't start diving before I could walk, but I started diving when I was 16. I went with a classmate to a local dive school. It seemed interesting. We did a test, like a kind of a try dive in a pool, and I said, "Oh, I love this. I want to be a diver." And that was in '88 when I was 16, and we are 31 years later, and I'm still diving. And it actually, I became an instructor in '94, and the last couple of years I actually, next to diving, I'm also doing service in a SAR helicopter as a rescue diver. So I have an interesting diving career.
Oh wow, very
that must be exciting, doing search and rescue work.
Yeah,
you'll have to come back and tell us about that.
Okay, deal.
Yes, I think that's a conversation for another episode.
So what about your favourite dive sites then? Guy, do you want to tell us your favourite dive site?
Wow, that is very, very difficult. It's. I originally come from Belgium, and I can tell you that there is none of my favorite dive sites will be in Belgium. But I've dived a lot in Holland, and it's a very nice place to dive. Maldives is great. Norway was fantastic. I had great experiences in the Bahamas. It's difficult. Every country is different. Italy is fantastic. France is great. I can't choose.
If you could pick one though.
I haven't been diving in the UK yet. Maybe if I go diving in the UK, then I would be able to answer the question and tell me exactly which is my favorite dive site.
Well said. Laura, how about you?
Well, I've traveled a lot. I was so lucky to have the opportunity to see so many beautiful places, but I must admit that Mediterranean Sea is still the place of my heart, like where I really like to dive. And especially if you talk about Italy, the Tyrrhenian side, so the west coast, has some amazing places. And one of the places where I actually did all of my very, very first dives when I was a teenager is, I don't know if you ever heard about it, the marine protected area of Portofino, which is in Liguria, so northern Italy. And there you have, it's an amazing landscape, both outside and inside of the water. The water is most of the times crystal clear, and it's a very well kept protected area. So you have like huge groupers and a lot of kind of fishes, the moonfish. You can see dolphins sometimes. It's amazing, and there are beautiful wrecks as well. So that's probably one of the places I feel closer to me.
One of my bucket list dives is actually in Italy. It's Baiae.
Baia, yeah, that's beautiful.
I'd love. Have either of you two dived that?
Yes. Yeah. That's the place where you can see all the remains from Roman times.
Yeah.
So you have ancient Roman villas with the, how do you say that in English? Mosaics?
Mosaics.
Mm-hmm. And that's amazing. You should go there, absolutely.
Yeah, I think they had Julius Caesar's villa and Emperor Nero's villa there, didn't they? Or they still have?
Yes.
Not sure if it was Julius Caesar's village, but surely it was a village. But I don't remember who it belonged to. But I don't think it was Julius Caesar actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
let's say it was Julius Caesar. It sounds better.
Yeah.
We'll have to put that on our European tour, Jim.
And then if you'd like to come close to our headquarters, Dan Europe, it's based in central Italy, in this region called Abruzzo. And a few kilometers south from us, you have a tiny group of islands that are called Tremiti Islands. And that's also a marine protected area. So you have a lot of fish and some Roman wrecks as well. So you can find all the amphora in the water, and that's also very, very nice place to visit.
Does that mean you two are going to be our guides then?
Absolutely.
I can see a long road trip coming up, Jim.
Another one.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. So thank you guys so much. Really, really interesting. And Dan Europe is for the place to go for our viewers and listeners on podcasts to get further information. And really appreciate you guys coming on and sparing the time to have a chat with us.
Thank you.
Thank you again for inviting. It was great being with you guys.
Yes, thank you. And hopefully maybe we can catch up in a few weeks when we know a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Brilliant.
Brilliant.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Take
Thank you.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.